You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is David Smith, Senior Analyst for the Morgan Report, which you can find online at silver-investor.com. Welcome to the show, David.
Good to be back, Jim.
Gold and silver versus petrodollar perils. Maybe explain to us what you feel that is and why investors should be concerned about it.
Well, the petrodollar is a term that's used for U.S. dollars that are used by different countries in exchange for buying petroleum and other goods, and it's extensive enough that it's come to be called the reserve currency of the world. And that is beginning to change. It's been underway for several years, and it's now picking up speed with a deal that the Russians and the Chinese signed for a natural gas agreement, which is going to be a pretty big effect, and it probably won't be paid in petrodollars. And the extent of that significance for the United States is that we depend upon being able to print almost unlimited amount of dollars and circulate those outside the country so that we can export our inflation and so we can buy a lot of goods at cheaper value than would be the case otherwise. And that the petrodollar, which is defined as a dollar circulating outside our country for that use, comes into question as to how much it's going to be used. That's going to change the whole matrix for us. And I was just thinking this morning, not just for us, but even with countries that are so-called dollarized, and there are countries in South America where their currency is actually the U.S. dollar. And then there are other countries like Argentina, which has its own currency, the peso, but it has one of the largest accumulation of dollars anywhere in the world. And so you could imagine if the value of that dollar were to decline substantially, it would have all sorts of unexpected and unintended effects, not just for the U.S.
And what could be some of those effects for Argentina and other countries?
Well, certainly it would increase inflation. It would increase the concern that people have about confidence in the monetary unit itself. And that's really, if you think about it, with the debts that we've been running over the last years, confidence is primarily what's holding it up. And if people lose confidence in it, they want to go somewhere else. And, you know, the lifeboat gets pretty crowded when that happens, and there aren't many options. And the other lifeboats that are around have been the historic ones of gold and silver. And I think the record flows of gold and silver into private hands as well as public ones over the last few years is an indication that people have that all is not well with the petrodollar, in addition to the other things we've discussed. And they know that gold and silver will give them an opportunity to have insurance and assurance. And that's a pretty powerful concept for putting away part of your wealth to try to preserve it in that way.
Well, the Canadian dollar has gained a couple of cents on the U.S. dollar over the past few weeks. And take a look at what's happened to the British pound over the last 6 months. It's gone from being $1.50 something to $1.80 something.
Yeah, it's really those currency moves are all over the board. And what's interesting too is some of the elections that have been going on in the UK and also in different European countries. There's a real unease that's becoming more and more obvious that people have about the debts that are being run by their governments, about the levels of increasing integration with other countries where everybody isn't on the same level of play, so to speak. And all of that chips away at confidence. And so it seems to me that even though the metals are very quiet now, they're trading in a sideways range, they are moving to a position where we're going to see some interesting fireworks, not necessarily predictable exactly, but certainly that there's going to become some increasing volatility maybe before the summer ends, when people are waiting to do something after Labor Day, but it turns out that something gets underway before then.
With India's election and business-friendly prime minister being elected, are they likely to lift their restriction on gold sales?
It seems like they may lift it or lower the amount of restriction in terms of taxation that they have. Either way, you're going to see a continued flow of gold and silver imports into India. This would just make it more transparent. But to all accounts, Narendra Modi is a free market capitalist, a lot more so than his predecessors, and there are high hopes for him. And the Indian indexes are responding favorably as well too. So we'll see what happens. But that's one more straw in the wind that should underpin gold and silver prices, and it may well take India back to the top spot in terms of gold consumption as the year progresses.
The banking system in the U.S., is it healthy?
It depends on how you define it. You know, a lot of the so-called bad bank loans have been sequestered by the Fed, and somehow those are supposed to be fed back into the system later on. But a number of banks have failed the stress test that they put up with it, to see how they would handle themselves in a crisis. The thing that a lot of people don't realize, average people like you and me, is that within almost all of our contracts that we have with our local banks, there are all sorts of small fine print items that would limit how much we could take out in the case of some kind of a banking concern or panic. And so we think we have access to our money just like that, but the reality is there are all sorts of impediments that have been put in our way legally that would suddenly become visible if there was a concern on the part of the bank. So people that have that confidence level really might want to look under the hood, so to speak, and see if they really want to have everything that they own in a location like that where they might not be able to access it when and if they needed it.
I know a lot of folks are concerned about a Cypress haircut, as I call it, where they go in and take so much. If you have a certain amount in a bank account, anything above that, they can haul off and use. And also both Canada and the U.S. have legislation that allow governments to seize your personal gold. Well,
you know, the so-called bail-ins where banks get into trouble and then they have their depositors help them out by, so to speak, volunteering to give them some of their money, which is not a volunteer at all. I mean, that is definitely written into the banking language, and it's hard to believe that that's even there, and yet it is, and it's most of the countries throughout the world have some form of that. I think that the thing that bothers me in watching what's going on with the metals being so quiet is that we've got inflation that is really creeping up in a big-time way, especially with food, but also with a lot of other goods and services, which do not reflect themselves in the annual monthlies that the Fed puts out. And I remember an individual, I think it was Michael Ballinger, who talked about inflation. He said, inflation is like toothpaste. Once it's out of the tube, it's impossible to get back in. And the Fed wants a certain amount of inflation, but they want to be able to control it, and they actually think that they can do that. And once that toothpaste gets out of the tube, you not only can't stick it in, but a lot of times you can't have any decision about where it goes either.
Well, anytime a government thinks they can control inflation, if you're old enough, you'll remember the late 70s where Canada brought in price and wage controls, and they did nothing to control prices, but they sure did keep your wages down.
Well, and it caused all sorts of speculations. And in the United States, we had the same thing, wage and price controls that didn't work very well at all. In fact, it didn't work at all. And I'll never forget, I think it was I'm trying to remember, President Ford, where their idea about controlling inflation was to come out with these little win buttons, which stood for whip inflation now. And the moment they were produced, it was just laughable. And of course, if that's the best you can do, then not too good at all. So I think we're headed for higher inflation. It's going to kind of stair-step itself up as we go on. And some people feel that by this time next year, we could be in a pretty severe bout of it. So hard to tell just right now, but the point is all that's going to be beneficial for precious metals holdings, and it's going to be not good for the general stock market itself.
David, Cambridge House is holding its annual resource conference, but it's not the same resource conference you went to last year.
Well, it's a little bit different, and I'll be looking forward to going up this weekend. It was primarily a resource sector conference in the past. Now they have a good, strong resource presence, but also there'll be technical, high-tech companies there and speakers about wealth preservation through tax, tax work schemes and things like this. So be a pretty broad brush, I think, that'll be painted, and it'll be interesting to see how the attendance works out. But it looks like there'll be, in fact, I think they've got 3 speaker halls rather than 2, and so it'll be interesting to see how the attendance is and what the breadth and depth of the presenters are.
Well, I know for a lot of people in the resource industry, they're finding that they have to diversify if they're going to stay alive.
Well, that's true, and the good news is about that is that the companies that do survive in that sector are going to be the strongest ones, and it should be easier for people that have done their homework when the next up leg of the bull market begins in gold and silver to pick a winner, because of a lot of the dogs and some of the outright frauds just won't be around anymore.
And one of the analysts I talked to in the past year or two, we've seen, say, 1,200 resource-based junior companies shrink down to 8. And he says, no, they could use some more pruning to make sure everybody's healthy, because when you have losers mixed in there, investors don't know where to go, where their money will be safe.
That's true, and the left for dead ones, some of them are still hanging on, but They've had a pretty big toll already, and it's going to continue until just the strongest are surviving, and they will be very strong ones indeed, most likely.
How are PGMs doing?
PGMs have been holding up well. Platinum and palladium just continue their little stair-stepping movement up, and I think one of these days you're going to see a pretty powerful breakout that maybe leaves some gaps behind, because a lot of pressure and tension is building up, and the fundamentals just keep getting better and better.
And the gold versus silver index?
Looking at SIL, which is a silver miners index, the volume is increasing. We have a bullish falling wedge from a technical analysis. Gold is a little bit more obscure. There's a triangle that's coming together in an apex, which indicates it's going to make a pretty good-sized movement one way or the other. The trouble with triangles, there's a one-third chance that they can break out in either direction. So my bias is up, but until the market tells me what it is, I'm not going to try to tell the market anything at all. But I'm going to be watching very intently to see which way that triangle breaks out. It could be this week or next week, Jim. It's so close to that apex point, so we shall just see.
Will the election in Ukraine make any difference?
No, I don't think so. I think the systemic issues that drive gold and silver in the direction higher are that's just one little thing. That's just a symptom, not a cause by any means.
David, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Been good speaking with you, Jim. Have a great day.
And looking forward to seeing you here in Vancouver for Cambridge House.
Definitely.
My guest has been David Smith, Senior Analyst for the Morgan Report, which you can find online at silver-investor.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.